So we'll start in some time. Right. Uh, Good evening, everyone. So today would be our first session of the Informaniac series that we have started. And the 10-minute talk is not obviously 10 minutes. That should be more clear, right? We have just used this metaphor to make it more, right? Make it more, casual and informal, right? And obviously, it is not a classroom that we are going to conduct right now. Right? I know already all of you are already burdened a lot by tests and whatnot, right? So obviously I'm not going to overburden you again with a classroom kind of session. Also, this will be more of an informal talk where you can also ask your doubts and talk about several things, right? Once we settle down over the time, and it is more about, you can say, an informal interaction, right, between you and obviously me, so that we can at least ward off this kind of monotony that we are going through, right? The kind of baggage which we have right now, especially for the examination, and also whatever we are experiencing right now. Fine. So every one of you might be involved in a lot of other things, a lot of activities, right? Along with obviously the exam that you have to give. Fine. So right now, we will be like I'm trying to uh, actually, indicate that we are not going into a kind of classroom session, but it will be more interactive in nature, and it will be helpful if obviously you also interact. And I know most of you might be having dinner right now, or might be planning to have dinner, or might be making your dinner, right? Might be cleaning utensils, might be uh, even sleeping, right? So it doesn't matter. Over the time, we can interact, right? And this is a platform that actually I have created just to, I would say, that same thing, eliminate the monotony and the kind of burdensome existence we all are going through. Fine, I know you have an exam, you have a purpose to fulfill, right? And that goal is definitely right now probably the most important goal right now, along with obviously your role, family and society and not whatever neighborhood, whatever you can do. That will be the best thing. Fine, so we will be talking about several things, right? Great. Yeah, Satendra, it feels really good, fine, and it feels good to me as well, fine, because after a long time, otherwise I would have just recorded a video and put it, right? But that is not the purpose of this talk. It's just about a lot of other things apart from the classroom, a lot of other things apart from the governance, right? It's more about life, and it's more about a lot of other things, fine. So we need to have that kind of interaction, right? And it cannot always be formal. It should not be formal. The formal interactions tend to be half truths most of the time. Fine. So I would like you to obviously be more open, more liberal in terms of sharing your ideas and views. Fine. And today's talk obviously revolves around governance, as already voted in the Telegram channel. A lot of students wanted uh, an interaction on that, so we'll be talking about it. But like I clarified, this 10-minute will not be 10 minutes; it can be half an hour, right? So there is no time limit. But yes, it is quite imperative that this 10-minute talk actually indicates that we are going to have more direct conversation, right? More heart to heart talk rather than just a kind of formal bookish interaction. Right now, uh, definitely, as you see how the world is changing and how fast things are happening, especially the impact of technology, and also the global conflicts, the cultural conflicts which are emerging simultaneously, which is a very peculiar trend because we are witnessing the tremendous transformation of economy, trade, technology, uh, obviously weapons, strategic development, architecture, right? And at the same time, we are also witnessing a lot of conflicts. Now, obviously, this can be one very unique perspective, that how is it possible that in spite of the literacy, in spite of the education, in spite of the technological development, we are still experiencing this kind of conflict, right? So can somebody of you give me an idea that why we are having this conflict? Why exactly this is happening, in spite of the prosperity which the globalization is supposed to bring, right? In spite of the GDP growth rate which we have been witnessing, like, not I'm not talking about the pandemic phase, but okay, how is it possible that this is happening, right? So anybody of you can give me an idea that what is happening. Like I said, don't make it so formal, right? I know many of you might be sleeping, many of you might be uh, yeah, Ritesh, thank you so much, and same to you. You also take care. I'm quite, yeah, I have to be concerned, no doubt. I have one specific issue of being pre-diabetic, but that's okay, right? We are taking care, and I'm trying to work on that, right? I'm working on that. Thank you so much, and same wishes to you all, right? Now, why is it that a lot of conflict is there? Cultural conflict is there, ethnic conflicts are there, right? Why do we experience a kind of, abrasiveness which is emerging within the governments? The overall administration is becoming more apathetic towards the people. People are getting too, over conscious of their government's behavior. They're too reactive now, rather than, may not be just a reference to the traditional values that we have. Values may be more contextual and more situational in nature, and this is what is the utility of values. Right now, obviously, you cannot. You can say you cannot talk about. Uh, you can say your personal values, right, being universal values. It cannot. It is not possible, right? Or your regional values as the national values. This is not possible. So obviously, your values will have a specific contribution to your perspective, right, and the way you look at things, and it will help you definitely to understand things better, right? So values definitely go away, but I think the most important reason for such kind of conflict is that we are getting into more individualistic mode, right? A kind of you can say a show off, a glamour, right, existence that we want. Also, somewhere definitely we are getting more reactive, in the sense that we are losing compassion. So in that sense, your idea of values is important. Even though when we look at pandemic today and people are helping each other, people have created a lot of communities, still people, or most of the people, are doing it and then projecting it as, something extraordinary that they're doing. So there is definitely a change in the way people are viewing their actions, and people want to project their good deeds, right? So ultimately you can say, yes, the inherent value of the good deed is lost, right? And technically it is being done more or less as an act of, you can say, establishing one's identity, right? So obviously conflicts are increasing. So when we think of the governments today, whether you talk about Israel Palestine conflict going on, right, when you talk about the the change in the guard in USA, right, the change in the total, political scenario in America, right, or the kind of problems which most of the European countries had to face during pandemic, the rise of China as superpower technically, right, India obviously struggling with a lot of basic things. So you can say throughout the world you will find that there is a changing perspective of how to govern, right? And more or less, if we see pandemic and this kind of emergency and chaos has become probably a very, you can say, uh, what you can say, a kind of means to, control people and people's behavior, right? Privacy is at stake. Technology, excessive use of technology, Facebook's privacy issue, then WhatsApp privacy issue. So a lot of issues are there, right? And they obviously somewhere pose a threat to the global governance now. And also the most important aspect is that today we are not restricted to governing within our own nation, within our own territory, or within our own region. It is more concerned with the governance overall, right? Uh, Collectively, you can say. Fine. So, in that regard, definitely the nature and the context of the governance is transforming, right? Now, coming back to our talk or discussion that we were supposed to do. So, when we talk about the governance as an idea, right, the idea of governance obviously emerges from the fact that the system of governing needs to transform, and there is a need for an consent or a strong consent of people who are being governed. So consent of governed becomes a very crucial aspect in understanding the governance, right? But then you will ask me a question that, okay, when democracy was already there, what was the need for this, and why do we highlight this consent for the governed? Consent for the governed is already there. Fine, it's in the procedure. Fine. So can somebody give me an input about why there is increasing focus on the consent of people, the participation of people, whereas the traditional democracy or the democratic system itself provides this idea already. So why we are focusing on that, and why governance brings this perspective, and this seems to be something new. Fine. So by logic, governance is about, you can say, mm, evaluating the overall scenario in which the government has to work, right? And somewhere believing that the role of the government is not just the implementation of rules and regulations, it is also accommodation of the opinions and the demands of people, right? And this accommodation has not to be done only through some policies and decisions, but it has to be in the overall culture, overall, you can say, the process of the governing. Okay, right from the elections, right from the manifesto formation. So if the parties are forming the manifestos, right, like we talk about multi-party democracy in India, so if the manifesto is being formed but people are not involved in that manifesto, right, most of the manifestos are based on the vote bank politics, right, and more or less people accept that these manifestos obviously will never be implemented. Okay, they have already accepted it, fine, but still they can be trapped into voting to for a particular party just by highlighting the provisions of the manifesto. So somewhere it indicates that there is an overall degradation of the democratic value system, one where people are mostly concerned about what they are going to get in the net bargain by voting for a particular party, right? Right. Yes, there we have different opinions, no doubt. Correct. But the logic is that, okay, why more than state institutions about opinion of people, it can increase demand side knowledge and capabilities of people, which is needed. Yeah, definitely. We have to include people, definitely, right? But what I'm trying to say is, understand this way, that you have a family, and let's say you stay in a very good house, right? Everything is well developed, you have all the resources, all the family members are there who sit together and eat dinner together, let's say in the evening, fine, but none of them agree to each other's opinions, right? None of them even agree for a debate or a discussion on an issue. Fine, all of them have their own egos, and instantly somebody suggests something, the other person technically criticizes him, or you can say downgrades the suggestion. Now, what will happen? In such a scenario, you have a system, you have a family, you have a structure, but the family and the structure is not working as per the mandate in which the family must function. So, structure is there, right? People are there, they're all flourishing, they all have resources, they're all developed, they're all evolved, they're all educated, but they don't come to, not, I'm not saying consensus, right? They don't even come to a kind of agreement, an agreement at least to disagree, right? So they don't even come to the point where they can agree that, okay, they disagree, and so they can debate about it. Now this is what is the state of governance. So what is it which we are facing today is the idea, right, that governance, right, is moving towards something what we can say is the uh, uh, it's not about just about the democratic form of governance, right? It is more about, when we say, individualized way of understanding things. So it is more moving towards like an individual democracy, right? So the collectiveness of the democracy is fading away for regionalism, individualism, right? And somewhere the choices are made in terms of bargain, right? This is the biggest issue which is impacting the governance now. So why we have chosen this topic? Obviously, because a number of students suggested it. Now the idea here is that, okay, are we going to define the governance? Are we going to understand the definition and scope of governance? Now, when you see your examination, you get a lot of inputs or a lot of questions around this idea. Fine, whether you go to your society part, when you go to your society part in paper one, fine, or when you go to the world history aspect also, right? When you see questions related to the post-independence consolidation, fine, or you see the question related to the environmental governance in paper three, fine. When you see the questions related to obviously ethics, a lot of scope is there in paper 2, GS paper 2. So a lot of questions in public administration, fine, are based on this idea that okay, exactly how can we define governance. Now the traditional definition of governance is coming from the World Bank, right? 1987 report, and we say okay, that is the definition of governance, that is how the scope of governance was defined, but that is totally outdated now, right? Prior to that, obviously the concept of governance can be understood with respect to the development of democracies in the European societies. So how democracies evolve, and these democracies obviously uh, were a product of the times and circumstances where monarchies were unstable, they were anarchic, they became exploitative in nature, and obviously people uh, were influenced by various choices, various opinions of the people who were so-called intelligentsia in that context. And so intelligentsia obviously influenced these kind of changes, right? But try to understand what I'm saying here, that democracy initially initiated was also a product of intelligentsia, was also a product of the elites. Elites in the sense, I'm not talking about economic elites, but I'm talking about academic elites, right? So when we talk about democracy today, why does it ail anybody that okay, there are a group of people, there is a minority which is actually governing, right? And majority is to be governed. So what is wrong with that? There's nothing wrong with that. Fine. Any society requires a pyramidical structure. Fine. The problem arises when the pyramidical structure becomes the basis for exploitation. When the pyramidical structure becomes too rigid, that okay, it cannot accept changes, it cannot accept the transformation, it cannot accept the voices and opinions of others, probably who are at the lower level of the pyramid. So the inequality, I would say, I'm not supporting the idea of inequality, but I'm trying to say the inequitable structure which exists in any society, right? That actually stabilizes the society for some time, because that will become the basis for revolutions, that will become the basis for transformation, that will become the basis for reforms and changes. So in your exam, when you look at your essay, when you look at your various papers, when you look at public administration, one you'll find that a lot of questions directly or indirectly arise from this area. Fine. So the scope of governance obviously is not about understanding the scope of governing. Fine. It is about understanding that how the social, political, economic changes which are happening can be accommodated in the process of governing. Right. Try to understand what I'm saying. I'm saying that the scope of governance is not just about understanding how to govern, fine, and when to govern, right? But it is also about how flexible we are to accommodate these changes, or to what extent can we use our resources in order to adapt to these changes. So the key concept of governance is adaptation, nothing else. Fine, accommodation, adaptation, fine, but it is not in the context of government, right? It is more in the context of society, government, and any other actor which is involved, whether you say media, whether it is civil society, whether it is your what is that, administration or bureaucracy, whatever is involved, fine. So it is about how this relationship has been established, and whether this relationship can survive the impact of circumstances. Fine. So now this is a quite abstract understanding. Fine. But we are starting from here so that, right, over the time we'll make it more simpler in terms of understanding it. So we are starting with here, this logic, right? So governance establishes as a concept, right, the importance of the state, citizen, administration, and host of other actors relationship. Now this relationship is bound by two factors. One is the formal relationship, means there are rules, laws, statutory obligations, constitutional provisions which will which will define this relationship between the people and the government, right? And obviously the other actors, how public private partnership will be formed, right? How citizen will be associated with the government, how administration will deal with the citizens, right? What is the mandate, rules, laws, regulations, remedies, right? One is the formal nature, this is also equally part of governance. The other is the informal aspect, which we call as the culture, where the actual behavior of these institutions deviate from the behavior which was prescribed, right? And this is the biggest issue, that how this actual behavior, it may be good and bad, I'm not saying that it will be a bad behavior, but how this actual behavior which was prescribed technically, how this changes, right? And how this must uh, be able to constructively impact the society. Now this is the biggest issue in governance. So considering this idea, we will be dealing with a lot of other aspects here, right? And so I would not poke further today, right? It is more about the discussion, and I see obviously a lot of you are still sleeping, fine, or slept early probably, but it's okay. We'll be talking about it. I would really appreciate if you come up with your own ideas also, fine. So meanwhile, we can accommodate those ideas. So tomorrow I'll be taking up from here because today we were more about the intro session. Fine, but I just wanted to convey the idea that this is more about an interaction, an informal interaction. Please don't make it a classroom. We'll discuss about a lot of things. Corruption ho gaya, fine, polity ho gaya, ethics ho gaya. We'll talk about a variety of things, right? And I will try to make you understand it at least so that you can use it. It's not just question was asked and you're fine. So, right, I think, is it fine? Okay, fine. So we will be coming up with obviously sessions every Saturday and Sunday. We'll talk about it. We'll talk about life. Fine. If you want, we can sing songs also. There's no problem with that. Or we can do some shairi, or we can talk about certain types of news and issues, whatever you say, right? But we will be starting with this, and definitely the important aspect is that it should not be one way. I would really uh, would have wanted you to have direct interaction and communication, but here you can just use the chat box. You can just write your doubts and queries, whatever, right? Even your emotions that you are feeling right now, fine. So that will be really helpful for me, right? And please don't treat it as a classroom or a very technical and formal discussion. This is actually being created so that we all somewhere get an opportunity to vent our issues and problems, right? Also, at least we find a more informal path of discussion, right? Rather than every time asking questions and doubts and ye nahi hua, wo nahi hua. And most of the students are ye kab hoga sir, ये क्वेश्चन नहीं चेक हुआ सर, मैंने आंसर लिखा था सर, वो उसमें आपने कम नंबर दिए, भाई अब ये ऑब्वियस है कि ये मेरे लिए भी बहुत टैक्सिंग है, ठीक है, हम भी इंसान हैं और हम सब इंसान हैं, मतलब नॉट मी जस्ट, एंड सो लॉजिकली कहीं ना कहीं हमें ये सोचना पड़ेगा कि वी हैव टू चेंज आवर पर्सपेक्टिव, राइट? सो आईने को पोछते रहो और यानी मुंह धोते रहो और आईने को पोछा नहीं, तो ये भी बहुत लॉजिक है, राइट? सो जस्ट डोंट थिंक कि ये सेशंस जो हैं बोरिंग और वैसे टाइप सेशन में, ठीक है, अगर होता तो पीपीटीज बना के हम बहुत सारा डिस्कशन कर लेते, बट दैट इज नॉट द आइडिया, right? So idea is that we need to interact, we need to communicate, right? And we need to create a community out of this so that we are able to not only help each other, yes, but in also in order to, you can say, we can support, right, intellectually, academically, and even emotionally, whatever others we are facing today. So this will be a continued session, right? Slowly and slowly, I know you people will be integrated into that, right? So it's hard to find where we are lagging in the political system, right? Yes, Satyan, we are lagging in the political system. We are not lagging in the political system, I would say. See, every political and administrative system somewhere justifies its own situations. Fine. So Waldo hai and all scholars hai in public administration, they are saying that administrative system is appropriate to its own genus. It is like a species, fine, which grows in a particular habitat. It grows in a particular system. सो ये बहुत लॉजिकल है कि आज जो एडमिनिस्ट्रेटिव सिस्टम आप देख रहे हो, ये प्रोडक्ट इस सोसाइटी का है, राइट? एंड ये प्रोडक्ट जो है 1950s का नहीं हो सकता, राइट? तो उसका एक कॉन्सिक्वेंस हो सकता है, इट कैन बी अ कॉन्सिक्वेंस, इट कैन बी नो डाउट एन इम्पैक्ट ऑफ दैट, बट इट इज नॉट अ प्रोडक्ट ऑफ जस्ट what was created in the constitution. It is a product of how we behaved, how we acted, okay, what we wanted, what were our individual desires, our collective desires, what kind of parties we have chosen, right? And ultimately, as a society, how we value our institutions, right? That is the most important aspect. Fine. So signing off for now. Thank you so much, and we'll try to make it more crisper over the time. But this was the first session, so I just wanted to give you a fair idea that this is not going to be a class, right? It is going to be better than class. Right. So thank you so much, all of you, and all the best and good night to you. And I hope we'll keep meeting and keep discussing whatever, right? So we'll be talking about a lot of things, okay, not just the formal syllabus. Fine. So see you. Good night, all of you. Thank you so much. Thank you.